there's trouble, G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day. He never gives up, he's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe! G.I. Joe is there!
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up, he'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe will dare. G.I. Joe! G.I. Joe!
Good morning, folks. I hope you enjoyed that introduction to our stream today because we're talking G.I. Joe. And I have with me Christopher Hilt from the Hilt and Jason from Mechhead Studios. They are going to be my subject matter experts for G.I. Joe today as we talk about gaming in G.I. Joe and gaming with G.I. Joe. And specifically ways you can do it that really don't need the licensed IP version of the game. That was kind of my focus here. Both these gentlemen are longtime fans of the show and the IP and the toys, and they're also gamers, supreme. So they also game everything in the universe. And we had a good talk the other day on the Discord about kind of pitching your original characters and just generally how there's been this sort of this ongoing discussion between me and Chris, and Jason and I have talked about everything in the universe for years, and it's just, I think, a really good topic and a really good angle to game in. And so with that, I'm going to let these two introduce themselves and kind of explain where they're coming from on this. Chris.
I'm Christopher Logan Hilt, the G.I. Joe gamer, dubbed by Elf Bait, which I appreciate that. I've been collecting G.I. Joe for years. I've been gaming for years, and I kind of combine those two on my show and my channel. And Elf Bait asked me to help him out here, so I've got no problem doing that.
Cool. Welcome. And Jason.
Yeah, so I'm Jason. You probably saw me last week. I've been with G.I. Joe since '83. Was fortunate enough to have my mother working at a place called Lionel Playworld along the Funk toy store. It was Toys R Us's rival. And I got a lot of Joes that fell off the truck. So, yeah. Lots of gaming, lots of everything.
Yeah, it's that story is cool. I just it's so funny because you always hear about stuff falling off the truck, and you're like, is that just something that people made up for movies? And no, I remember I met a butcher in Long Island who always had good meat that he would bring home, and it was like, is this from your shop? No, this fell off a truck. I'm like, okay. He had the hookups. All right, so G.I. Joe gaming, and just going to real quick say good morning to Mara Hockman and Beltane. I see we have 6 people watching so far. I think one of those is Chris, who's actually also in the comments, and me probably because I'm tuning in from the other. But so history of G.I. Joe as a property. I mean, most people who are here probably know big Barbie size, dolls. And then later on, it's debatable. A lot of people will debate this, but I really feel like G.I. Joe actually became huge with the 80s and the 3.5-inch figures and the cartoon. It was big before, but I don't think the success of the early versions of G.I. Joe really can stand up to the 80s media blitz that Real American Hero was. And that's when we're talking about this particular era of G.I. Joe, that's the Real American Hero, right? That's kind of what it's termed as, the whole classic G.I. Joe cartoon. And it was cool. I mean, you got 8 million characters. You had and the bad guys had nearly as many characters and stuff as the good guys. And how often does that happen in a toy line? Even, I think about the only other toy line I can think of that was about that even was like GI Joe, and maybe Mask, but. Oh, not GI Joe, but He-Man. Excuse me. He-Man was, because you had kind of a 1-for-1. But a lot of times in the earlier lines of toys, you would have a bunch of heroes and maybe like a couple of bad guys.
Well, that's kind of how it started. G.I. Joe had just the 2 Cobras, and they weren't even going to do Cobras at all. Until they took it to Marvel. Marvel said, "Who are they fighting?"
Yeah, and then Cobra Commander was a mail-in figure,
right,
in the first wave.
Yeah, but I think it's serendipitous that they had that early push by an outside force to expand on that, because while yes they gave us generic Cobras, which you could buy umpty billion of them, because we got an officer and a trooper basically, wasn't it?
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, we had the officer who had like the SMG, I think it was, and the trooper who had the AK or whatever. But yeah, that was I mean, and then of course it explodes from there, where you have different cycles in different. You have the different generations where the flagship leader guy of the Joes kind of shifted from Duke to
General Hawk.
Well, there's General Hawk, and then there was also the dude with the beret. Flint. Yeah, I'm so bad with the memory. I mean, that's why I have you guys. That's why I have you guys here, because I know you're going to remember it a lot better than I do.
Hawk started it, and then Duke kind of took over for him in the second year.
Yeah,
and then once Flint showed up, for me, he was my go-to leader. So
yeah,
and then it also depended if you were watching the animated series or reading the comics, because in the comics you had General Flag, which isn't the General Flag that is on the ship, the Flag, who was then followed by Hawk, who then de facto to Duke, and then Hawk came in later.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the other thing to remember is that that a lot, the cartoon and the comic were very different trajectories. The comic book was very serious.
Yes.
In my opinion, it was a very gritty comic book. But what's funny is at the same time, while it was serious and gritty, it kept all the character and of the show and the action figure line. But they were just like, if you wanted just fun after school cartoon action, or Saturday morning cartoon action. I can't even remember when it was aired. I think it was daily, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was one of those daily series. Yeah, it was daily for me. But then the comics were, I mean, that was definitely a different vibe altogether for G.I. Joe. Real quick, I'm going to jump in and answer this question here. We'll talk about miniatures, but I don't have any direct experience with the new official miniatures game. I've seen it. The figures look cool. They're way too big to go with anything else that I have, because it's I think it's the same people doing Marvel Crisis Protocol, and those figures are huge. Let's see. And then Mar Hockman also has this to say: a good set of heroes needs comparable villains to make them look good. Yes and no. I don't think the cartoon ever made the villains seem comparable. Like, they always had great plans, but they were always stumbling over each other. The comic book versions of the villains were much more competent. I mean, face it, Cobra had Springfield.
I'd argue that the Cobras were more interesting as characters than a lot of the Joes.
Well, yeah, I mean, because the Cobra, I mean, the Joes were pretty much always reacting to whatever Cobra was doing in the comics. So Cobra was where the meat of the story was coming from. There were side plots and little subplots within the Joes, but the Cobras also had those. So but getting into the subject of, so that's the background kind of that we're going from. And I know when I was in high school, my buddy Garth and I were we would draw things all the time. And so we started playing G.I. Joe almost as an offshoot of just drawing our original characters. You know, we would pull apart GI Joe figures and put, make them into new characters all the time and stuff. But we would then draw a lot of characters, and so we just started playing GI Joe, and we would use different systems depending on what we were into. I know, like, we used Twilight 2000 at one point there, and then also when Merc 2000 came out, that was easier to use because it was actually more of a solid state world than a post-apocalypse. But we also used we ultimately ended up just using the Marvel Superheroes one, because GI Joe characters are effectively superheroes. They're just honestly, they're about the same as like Shield or AIM or Hydra. They're a super organization, and honestly, Cobra, it's exactly like AIM or Hydra. If you think about it, those classic superhero evil organizations, that's exactly what Cobra is.
Well, Archie Goodwin from Marvel Comics actually said, "Okay, we've got Hydra. Let's just make Cobra. It's basically the same thing. We'll just call it Cobra."
And along those lines, a superhero game is honestly probably one of the best engines you can use if you're just picking a game off your shelf to play GI Joe in, because it's already got all the tools you're going to need for GI Joe. Yeah, let's see. Just looking at some of the comments here. Definitely talk about the Cobra organization's failure in the '87 movie. GM Cody, welcome. All right, so that is enough about me. What did you guys want to bring to this discussion? I know I have gamed GI Joe using various systems. Have any of you, either of you, played GI Joe action?
I have checked this out, and I liked a lot of the ideas in it, but the actual game system, it just for me, it doesn't work for GI Joe at all. And
it has some fundamental problems.
Yeah,
it really doesn't capture either the cartoon or the comic series, any iteration of the comic series. As far as the Joes go, it just seems really lacking to me. I got about 4 chapters in. That was it. I was done.
From what I understand from the reviews I've seen, it breaks down even before you get to the play in the character generation.
Yeah.
Because whoever wrote it just doesn't understand how the military works. Not that that's crucial to making it work, but if you're going to put it in your game, it is important. Like if I was to run run it through Marvel Superheroes, that's not a factor. That's just, you build your character and they have their talents and stuff like that. You're not trying to simulate that militarism that is the background of GI Joe. But if you're gonna put it into the game, you better understand how it works. Because go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was done.
Well, that was my major issue with it, being former military myself. It presents only Army, Navy, and Air Force. Now, one can argue successfully that the Marine Corps is Department of the Navy. That's a fact. Everybody knows it. But they also forget the Coast Guard. And a lot of people do forget the Coast Guard is a part of the Department of Defense. I mean, we had a Joe, his name was Cutter, who ran the Whale, the giant
the
hovercraft.
The Brown Water Navy,
He was very specifically says Coast Guard. And the way that they present like military jobs, like occupations in the book, like only the Army can be an MP, only the Army can be this, only the Air Force can be this. It's like, no, all the branches have this in them. So it just seemed very limited in scope, or gave the wrong idea. And I know the game is not made specifically for former military like myself, or anybody who's active military. But it does lose that little bit of realism to it by saying, this is just all in this people, and only these guys can do this.
It seems like I said, it seems like a very big miss when you're bothering to put it in. When you're putting in that much work to put it into your game, do it right? But also, it was such a big part, and I understand why they wanted to put that in there, because that's a big part of the toy line in the show. The characters had backgrounds within the branches of service or civilian life that brought them into GI Joe, and it was on their file cards, and you had that lineage. I mean, I remember in my 20s, as a Gen Xer with the generation where all the dudes either went to prison, rehab or the military, right? That's the joke, right? All my buddies who went to the military would kind of pick a favorite Joe who was like, I like this guy because he's in the same branch as me, or you liked this guy because he was in the same branch as your dad, or that's the one your dad bought you because that was his branch, or grandpa was a D-Day vet, and you that was you just gravitated to their backgrounds a lot of time. So if you're gonna put it into the game, do it right. That's why one of the reasons we used Twilight 2000 for a while, because Twilight 2000 understood. They Twilight 2000 had it maybe to a fault, too detailed, too down to earth. But I mean, I know you mentioned using Recon at one point for it, Jason, right?
Yeah, so what I use, and I know a lot of people hate Palladium books. Believe me, I'm no longer a major fan of them. But yeah, when we were playing it in the early 90s, this is like middle school age, we were using Ninjas and Super Spies by Palladium, Recon, second edition, and then also the Palladium Books Compendium of Modern Weapons. That basically was everything you needed right there to play G.I. Joe. You can make your Cobra, you can make your Joe, your civilian, whatever, what have you. We tried Twilight 2000, and while it's really detailed, it was kind of like the Cobra vehicles gave us a little bit of a problem, but vehicles were in the background anyway.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we gravitated towards Marvel, because Marvel is the Marvel system is so flexible that, okay, I need a super tank. Okay, super tank. I could just write a super tank and it's not going to break the game, and it's not hard. I mean, you and I talked about this. Nowadays, if you were to use Palladium, you'd have all the Rifts books to just mine for whatever crazy crap you wanted to put into your game. I mean, Coalition stuff itself, just stock, just
Cobra right there.
Scrape off the skull and put a snake on it, and it's Cobra. So that works. Mara Hockman has a few comments here on, the military aspect of it, and I'm just going to run them in sequence here because I thought there was some good comments here.
Oh, he's absolutely right. When I was in the Marine Corps, just because I was an MP, it didn't mean I wasn't getting put into the motor pool or getting put on sapper duty or doing this and doing that. You are cross-trained. So that's real. That is realistic in both the comics and the cartoon.
Yeah, well, most characters, if you remember, on their file cards would have a primary and a secondary MOS. And that's because whoever wrote those cards either did his research or knew.
Larry Hama wrote most of
Yeah, Larry Hama wrote it all.
Yeah. Now, there is the flip side. I've known a lot of vets who claimed expertise on things way outside their purview. Like, I used to know a tanker who would just want to wax expert on things Navy. I'm like, the last time I checked, they didn't have any floating tanks, dude. But
you do get that cross training, and then through your military career, you can meet people and you can become quote unquote expert. And if you were thrown on a ship, you wouldn't be lost doing what you were asked to do.
Yeah, I always, but it was kind of funny though, because it always struck me as okay, dude, I get that you've met people and you have an interest and you have a research, but so do I. I just don't have the firsthand experience, but still, it just some of his claims were just way out there, and we all knew that guy in the '80s who was 18, not even out of high school, claiming that he was going to be he was a Navy SEAL. He was like a secret Navy SEAL. The Kung Fu magazine having Ninja Star belt buckle guy.
Yeah.
So prevalent is that guy that they made fun of him in Venture Brothers with Brock Sampson's son. He's basically that kid that we all knew. Let's see. Let me go through some favorites here. So Cody, who was a Wild Bill favorite. That's just because you're named after him, Cody. Let's see. I think while this may be the case, I think it's just a poor design choice. If you can't balance your game and maintain accuracy, then you're not doing your job. Because if you're gonna put it in, then they could do this, yes. But at that point, what they should have done is been less specific and more categorical. Like infantry, the Marines and the Army both have infantry type soldiers. They could have done that and just had like operational packages rather than specific branch paths.
Correct.
And that would have done that. That would have accomplished the same thing for balance reasons. And sure, a GM who's running that game can figure it out and say, okay, well, if you're going to play a Marine grunt, whatever, jarhead, whatever the term is, because I'm not a military guy. You're a Marine, Jason. So I'm sorry if I'm insulting any of you. But the GM could go, okay, just use the Army infantry package. It may not be identical. Yes, the training may vary somewhat, but functionally within the game, it would be the same. But you shouldn't have to. And that's the point. Right. If you're picking up that book, especially a book that's made specifically, it's not like G.I. Joe is some generic game that's trying to, fit a wide, broad spectrum of gaming. It's the G.I. Joe game.
Right. And Bellatane, I don't think they screwed it up on purpose. I think, well, they may have. It was more like in the early marketing, and this pissed off a lot of people. In the early marketing, when they were like on Facebook and social media, there were a lot of questions about G.I. Joe and also the Transformers game they were trying to launch concurrently. And they Renegade straight out told everybody, yeah, you can only do G.I. Joe in the first book. We're going to have another book that's going to be another $50 you got to buy so you can play Cobras. I mean, they're soldiers. Soldiers are soldiers. So, it's pretty easy. So I think it's all marketing, just like with the new Marvel game.
The rule book they had was just it was thick. It wasn't a thin book. They could have put all that in here.
The other thing to consider though too is when we may probably never know this, how much their license agreement got in the way with how they release their stuff, because there are some very narrow specific licenses that'll come out and say you can only do this with your first book, and then based on the success of that, we'll let you do this. Or if you're going to do that, we have to spread it out. There are other things too. It could have just been a business thing. They're like, look, to be able to make back our money, we need to spread this butter as thin as we can to get as many dollars out, because we have to ultimately pay Hasbro.
Yeah, I think that's the case, honestly. Yeah.
I know the creators were excited about it. I mean, reading what they were saying hyped me up to buy the book, and then it was like, well, this isn't what you were talking about.
Yeah, I don't think the creators are like at fault in this regard for lacking spirit or intent. Like, I think they really were in it to win it, but maybe they just picked, they went with a weird sort of D20-ish derivative. And I say ish because it's not exactly a D20 derivative, rather than really doing their own system. It's Bear the Gen X GM. Rock and roll was his dude. I love the romance between Mainframe and Zarana.
I haven't had rock and roll on my desk.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell the game is a labor of love for the creators. It's just the system itself is what's flawed. Because they do a deep dive in a lot of the characters. More on some than others. And the artwork is gorgeous. The system itself is just,
I know Chris calls it a coffee table book.
Yeah, he confused me when he told me that the other day.
Well, that's kind of when you see a bunch of magazines on the coffee table, people just toss them there just to look at while they're waiting. And that's kind of what it is. It's nice to look at, but for me, it's not a book I'm used to game. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, so we got good comments coming in. Just sharing some of folks' favorite characters. There's a big discussion on MOSs and stuff like that, and operating equipment and technology. So
Keep in mind, this is a fantasy world. It's not real.
Well, and that's kind of why I think it's important when you're picking a game. Kind of bringing it back on topic here, picking a game to play GI Joe, is the realism isn't as important as the over the top action. I mean, another game system that is generic but specifically written for these Saturday morning and after school cartoons is Cartoon Action Hour. Not had a chance to play it, but I've read through some of the stuff on it. It looks pretty solid. But again, it's a generic game. But the rules for that game are even framed in characters, vehicles, and play sets. So any kind of location in the game is referred to as a play set. And it has stats and mechanics. So you're like, the Cobra base playset, the His Tank vehicle. And it's really cool. So picking your system, you want to make sure that, and you mentioned kind of your trouble with this, with the systems that you would use, Jason, is that some of the stuff in G.I. Joe can be really kind of funky. And if you're picking too gritty and too hardcore of a system, it may not work. Mm-hmm. It may be more problematic. So leaning on something a little looser, because all that MOS stuff, while it's really cool, most skill systems in a game will allow you to build that anyways. Like Palladium, for example, has OCCs, occupational character classes, for everything at this point.
Oh yeah, you get the OCC, then you got the secondary, depending which system, the MOS, and then the secondary MOS. So you can really make a good character for Joe.
I remember Robotech actually broke that down pretty well, because you were playing military characters, and so they had your primary MOS and your secondary MOS.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't do that in there. That was very specific to the G.I. Joe file cards, and they just didn't do that.
Yeah. So again, picking your system is important, because you need to make sure it's going to flex well enough to have generic things like machine guns and tanks, and then weather dominators.
Right.
Although the weather dominator is more of a story thing, so you don't have to mechanically have the weather dominator in there. But if you wanted to, it also, you have to decide early on, just like how you want to play your G.I. Joe. How much of it do you want to just be hand waved and be a story element, and how much do you want to actually have the nuts and bolts? I'm a nuts and bolts guy. Not that I feel like the weather dominator has to be statted out, but I also feel like when you're playing a setting that has lots of cool little fiddly greeblies and stuff like that, it's nice to be able to have their stats. It's like why, and when the one other streamer I was talking about the difference between Cyberpunk 2020 and Cyberpunk Red, why I prefer 2020, because it has the greeblies and all the little bits that are fun on gear stuff. So we actually have a question.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
Yeah, me too.
How evil would y'all run Cobra Organization?
That's for your talking, Todd. That you mentioned Gung Ho. I have him up here too.
Yeah. Let's see. So I'm going to let you guys take this first, and then I'm going to answer it.
So for me, if I were to, well, not if I were, when I was running Cobra, my idea for them was they had the best laid plans, but they were very specific plans. So there was no room for error. If anything went wrong, like you saw in the cartoon, everything falls apart. But I would definitely keep Cobra Commander as he was in the comics, where he was literally an evil genius. It was the people surrounding him that screwed up. And yeah, they'd just be like the top tier. But I was joking with Chris the other day. There's some things now in the real world where even Cobra Commander would be like, oh, hey, hold on. We're evil, but we're not that evil.
Yeah.
Agreed. I think I would run it a lot like possibly the way it was in the animated Resolute, where Cobra Commander straight up killed Major Blood for being a traitor, man. All he did was fail. You didn't even betray him, but he called him a traitor and said he failed, and right in front of all his troopers, he killed Major Blood. They didn't actually show it in the movie. They just had the aftermath, and Scarlet came and investigated his death.
Yeah, but they found Major Blood on the steps of, I think, was it the White House or the Lincoln Memorial? Just out in the open.
It was way out in the open, yeah.
Yeah, Resolute, if anybody's wondering, Resolute was probably the best G.I. Joe incarnation animated series, in my opinion.
Yeah, isn't that?
Definitely
It's
worth
a little
watching.
closer to the comic in tone, I think, isn't it?
It is. And it's a good marriage of the comic and the cartoon series, and they kill off a lot of Joes and a lot of Cobras. There's a lot of death in that series,
Yeah,
or in that movie, I should say.
Bazooka met his demise in that movie.
Yes,
Yeah.
he did, and I believe Shipwreck also. Quite a few of them. A
Oh,
lot
So
of them.
that's
what you're telling
possibility.
me is it's the Transformers the movie of G.I. Joe, where all your favorite
Yeah, but-
characters die.
And they don't hold back. They really don't.
And they made it look like they killed people too, and then all of a sudden
Mhm.
they'd show back up and be like, "No, I did this, and that's how I got away." It was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for me, I'm not going to be like contrary on purpose, but I tend to play mine not when we played ours. I tend to lean a little bit more into the comic book, not comic book, but the comic book style, not the actual comic of villain organization, kind of the over the top, actiony, cartoon, fun, evil villainy. Yes, we did have some serious plot lines develop in our games, but I didn't lean too much into trying to make Cobra feel realistic or super gritty. Nowadays, I mean, I might. Now, granted, keep in mind, the last time I played G.I. Joe as an RPG, I was still in high school. So, I mean, my attitudes have changed a bit. I did go through my cyberpunk phase, so who knows?
Yeah, but
I may
that is
have
the
gotten
great
darker since then.
Yeah, but that is the great thing about G.I. Joe. You can lean towards the hardcore realism or the comical. Either way,
Yeah.
it's still a fun game. Whatever works for you.
Yeah, I
And
never
you're-
went full
you're-
comedy goof spoof like some people might, and that's totally cool if you want to do that. But for mine, it was just more along the lines of the cartoon, I think. With
Your
our
table
villains
of
being-
players would set that tone
Mhm.
as well. You know you get a feel for what they want as a game master, and that's what you run.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a good point. Your players are you're gonna let your players guide it. Let's see.
Like if
Well,
everybody
let
ends
them
up
guide
playing
you,
Buckle.
be your game master. Be your own game master for sure.
But yeah, so trying to think of where to go next, because we've covered sort of the basics of it. But I guess let's talk about like the why of why you would even want to play G.I. Joe. Like why is this a IP worth diving into and bothering to play? And I'm gonna go with Jason to start here first. Why would you say it's a good thing to play? What's the elevator pitch, or even just the short reason that you would say is a good reason to play G.I. Joe?
Well, G.I. Joe it's full of everything. I mean, you can have your basics frontline troops going. Of course, you've got your characters going, but you can add in, other things. You can add in the crazy robot. We've seen that a couple times throughout both series. Government conspiracies, international conspiracies. You could just add in so much stuff. You can add in the weird and the cosmic horror as well, because that was introduced. If you want to go with more of the sci-fi, bring in Cobra Law. There you go. Have Cobra Commander change into that snake and just wander the earth. Why? I was once a man.
Man.
I mean, there's a lot that you could do with it. And then if you want to go a little bit further, you can always do, I don't think we're going to really go into it. You can add in the Transformers like they did in the comics. Several iterations. There you go.
Well, that's the nice thing about picking a system that'll handle anything. Like, again, going back to Marvel, you're never going to have a problem shifting gears. Rifts or Palladium, giant robots are just part of that. So, yeah, that's a good way to go.
Oh, there was even a point where they traveled to an alternate universe where the Joes met their dead selves and Cobra ruled the world.
Best
There's
episodes.
always that.
Yeah, I don't remember that episode, but
Oh, yeah,
it's
it was
been a
great.
long time. All right, so Chris, what about you? Why do you think G.I. Joe is worth it?
For me, it's the characters. I mean, whether you want to have your players playing a Cobra trying to defeat G.I. Joe, as a game master, you could set it up that way. But I would prefer them being G.I. Joes because that's the heart of the storyline. But the characters are so the backstories and everything, and to make a character of your own like that would be very cool. And I've always thought that would be such a neat thing to do. But I've never been able to find players who wanted to play G.I. Joe. It's always either fantasy or sci-fi.
Yeah, well, that's the eternal problem, is finding people to play the game that you want to play, which I think online gaming is probably the great savior in that regard, because we're no longer limited by geography. It has its own problems, but, the fact that we're not, like, okay, well, the only guys I can find to play G.I. Joe are one guy in Denmark, another guy in China, and one guy in the Australian outback. Okay, cool. Well, we can still play. Time zones and work schedules, allowing. For me, I think it's. I think both of you guys, nailed the key points for me. It's the fact that whatever character you want to make, there's a way to fit it into G.I. Joe, because G.I. Joe had everybody, and not everybody has to be of a military background in G.I. Joe. There were football players in G.I. Joe. There were pro wrestlers in G.I. Joe. And those are some of the cornier aspects. But even in the serious characters, some of them had, civilian, backgrounds. You had civilian law enforcement agents who I think were in there in a couple of characters.
Yep.
You didn't have to have a military background. And then there were their allies. Cobra as an organization is just a infinite toy box for creating new ideas, new troop types, bringing in new characters. And then Chris and I were even talking about this, and Jason on our little conversation leading up to the stream. You don't have to even stick to the Cobra G.I. Joe dynamic. You can create a new organization or a new sub-faction, you can, and that's the other thing is, like, when you're creating characters, if you're creating a new Cobra NPC to deal with, is he straight Cobra? Is he a Dreadnought? Is he, what is he? Where does he fall? And so you have all of that freedom, both in terms of world building, but also character building. And that's what, like it was mentioned when we went back in school, that's what drove us. It's like, oh, I can draw this character, and like, I'm drawing all these characters and we role play. Why don't we play it? Right. So it's, it's one of those games, one of those IPs that you can just have fun with. I was talking to Chris about, for Cartoon Action Hour, there is a G.I. Joe-like setting in one of their campaign settings that I can't remember the name of it. I think it's like Shadow Force or something like that. And it's a G.I. Joe-like organization that is fighting against a Cobra-like organization, but that Cobra organization is made up all of like classic movie monster villains. Like, the leader is a vampire, and there are Frankenstein troopers and werewolf. There's a like, instead of the Dreadnoughts, they have the Pack, which is all a bunch of lycanthropes, and it's all horror monster themed villains. And on its own, it's cool. But if you were playing a G.I. Joe campaign, and like Jason was saying, if you wanted to bring in like the weird mystical stuff, what if G.I. Joe has a paranormal sub branch that is like the Shadow Force, and they're dealing with that other organization? And what happens when Dracula and Cobra Commander start teaming up? And
well, you can also
what's Baroness's connection to the vampire? Because she's from like Romania or whatever.
You could also have like one of the Joes actually be a werewolf, or that team actually, all of them have something about them that makes them supernatural or paranormal.
No, the dog handler got bit by a werewolf, and now he is a dog.
Oh man, I'd hate to meet Mud as a werewolf. That'd be horrible, man. That's crazy.
But I'm going to dive in here and go to some of my starred comments real quick. So Beltane, Top Secret actually is probably another one of those ones that would lend well, because it does deal with specializations and like organizational aspects to your character. And it was built around gizmos and gadgets. So it seems like a pretty good setup for G.I. Joe. I haven't played Top Secret since the original box set Top Secret, but
same.
Back then, yeah, it would have been a good one. What was that, Chris?
I made a character, never got to play.
Yeah. And then Bear wanted to share his idea for his campaign setting. So it starts out with it's been 30 years since G.I. Joe defeated Cobra and the end of the 80s. Well, Cobra vanished. And then he says, continued. Now suddenly Cobra has returned and they haven't aged 30 years. What the hell? And so a new team of G.I. Joe PCs.
I think that was the plot of Resolute, wasn't it? Like Cobra pretty much disappeared to the wayside, and then all of a sudden they show back up.
Yep, pretty much. But at least they show the Baroness and Destro a little older.
Yeah, they did age. They did
and
age.
even the Joes were older too. Roadblock was a lot older. And it was kind of cool.
And Mainframe was a female because I believe I can't remember. Did Mainframe die or did he
I think it was Dialtone in that one. But yeah, they did have a female Mainframe in the Devil's Due. I'm pretty sure that was in that Brazil pack.
Yeah.
Because Mainframe had died in their continuity.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's another thing is that they reused the code names as far as I understood it. Like
right.
And so if you I mean, from a character generation standpoint, like I want to make this specialist. I don't like the one I don't want to play the one that's in the lore. Can I just rewrite this character as mine? Although if it was me, I would just come up with another code name because G.I. Joe also has multiples of various specialties. So, it's not like there's just one dude. And then Tonka Todd, could the base mechanics of Cyberpunk Red or 2020 be used to play G.I. Joe? I would say yes. More so 2020 than well, actually, base mechanics, either of them could, yes. I feel you're going to get more for your mileage if you went with 2020 because it has more specificity in its equipment. If that's something you're looking for, like if you want every little Cobra gizmo or specialty troop to count for something, Cyberpunk 2020 is going to stand up better than Red because Red genericizes everything and puts it into like broad categories. Heavy assault rifle. But that all comes down to what kind of a gearhead player you are. I understand that not everybody cares that the Arasaka whatever, assault rifle is, slightly better than the Militech Arms version, but for me that was always important. So, but the short answer, yes. So, let's see. Looking at some of the comments here. Yeah, Bear mentions that Rocky Balboa was a G.I. Joe.
Yeah, we've been kind of debating that. He was, yes, I agree. He was a Joe for about 3 seconds.
Then you had the refrigerator Perry. I can't remember his first name.
Yeah.
He never appeared in anything but the comics, but he did have an action figure, so he counts.
They turned.
We were talking about Matt Tracker from Mask was an official action figure too. And Mask, well, and there's another way. So there's a cool miniature gaming company called Traders Galaxy, and his entire universe of games, and I say universe because he kind of does a GW model in how he builds his game. He's got his core game, and then he's got offshoots from that game that are all set in the same universe. So his main game is Bot War. And Bot War is the miniatures game that is a love letter to all things 80s cartoons. You've got Transformers, you've got G.I. Joe, you've got Cobra, you've got Mask, and in all these different aspects of those in one game. And in his group, he's got like the Democracy, which is like his version of G.I. Joe. And bringing this back to Mask, in there, he's got the special operations team for the Democracy, which is the Mask team. His version of the Mask team. It's not one for one. He doesn't copy this stuff. It's all inspired by. And then he's got like a 28 millimeter. There's a comment earlier about miniature games. He's got a 28 millimeter range for a man-to-man combat game. That some of his characters are amazing. His original characters, you can tell they're inspired by classic G.I. Joe, but he's not copying them one for one. Mm-hmm. Like, he's got his Snake Eyes, but it's a different type of character, and he's got like some cool villains and stuff. But again, if you're running G.I. Joe as an RPG, there's nothing to say you can't pull in other cartoons and have them in there because the comics and the toys themselves did it.
Mhm.
I mean, how many times did G.I. Joe just show up in Marvel Comics as the background U.S. Army division that showed up?
Oh yeah, like, I
Not even
remember
in the
very
Transformers ones.
like in the Secret Wars, I believe I remember them showing up in one of the off issues.
And it was them because you'd see like the armadillo and stuff like that,
Mhm.
vehicle, the very distinctly G.I. Joe vehicles in there. And you're like, okay, that's clearly, and I don't know how much of that was by intent or if it was just the artists having fun. But it
Probably a little
puts
both.
it puts
Yeah.
G.I. Joe firmly into the greater universe.
I mean, it
And
drives sales.
I mean, you see that armadillo in the comic, and then you see it on the shelf. Like, hey, that's the thing from the Secret Wars.
Hmm.
And can we mention just for a moment how much marketing genius the 3.5-inch toys were, because they had every point of purchase level, whether it was the cheap toys all the way up, that I never felt like any. I mean, there was probably one or two, but most of the purchases, regardless of what your budget was when you were buying GI Joe, you felt like you're getting something pretty fun. Like
Oh yeah.
the RAM was definitely cheaper than a lot of stuff. Like I had the RAM because I couldn't afford a Sky Striker. My parents wouldn't get me a Sky Striker. But even things like the Armadillo, were tiny little, little vehicles, but they were still fun. And usually you got a figure, even if you didn't, like the Vamp came with a figure,
Yeah.
like,
Same
even
with
though,
Clutch, my character, Clutch.
yeah, and that's, it's, I mean, there were a few of them that didn't, but even if you were just all you could afford, all you had in your pocket was enough to buy one of like the extra weapon sets, it was
Hmm.
still fun, because now because they would come with like a jetpack. So now you had an extra jetpack, so that you could put on another figure, and it wasn't just Stalker with the jetpack.
And that was the great thing about it, for the toy line specifically. Everybody, no matter what what your parents' income bracket was,
Yeah.
everybody could have at least one Joe. And let's say everybody had the same Snake Eyes figure. Okay, well, I'm Snake Eyes. Who are you? I'm the Black Ninja Cord. You just
Yeah.
made up a new name. There's your ninja team. Let's go play.
Or
Unlike other toy lines.
I'm Snake Eyes as the evil. Snake Eyes as evil twin.
Yeah.
Before Storm Shadow came out.
Hmm.
But and then that was the fun of it. And of course, if you were an enterprising child, you learned how to pull your figures apart and start swapping parts, and then you were making your own original characters, because sometimes you'd go to Toys R Us and all that was on the pegs was like 15 grunts and a couple of zaps.
Yeah.
Like, all right, well, gonna get these guys. I'm gonna buy that last extra weapon kit, and now I've got a grunt with a jetpack and a laser rifle.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, it was really cool. And then you could start swapping Cobra and Joe parts around, and pull out your acrylic paints, and next thing you know, like that extra grunt that I had, I popped a Cobra head on him, and now he's a Cobra such and such mission specialist. And there is the heart of the role playing too, though. That 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 play style that we all had in the sand pits and the backyards, and at school when you could sneak your stuff to school, that play style feeds directly into why it's a good thing to play as a role-playing game, because you can just have fun with it. You can make the character you want, and it can be as cool or as dumb. And it's
Clearly, they had that in mind with the original original 13 Joes, because they were very generic looking, and all their parts were interchangeable. Most of them, anyway. There were very few original parts on those guys. Some of their heads, yeah, but for the most part, even the heads were interchangeable.
And that I mean, honestly, you want to talk about product development genius? Let's reuse these parts as much as we can to cut our development costs, but be able to maximize the variety of stuff. It's like, okay, we've got 15 different heads and bodies now. We can swap them around and create a new character. So that's genius. Duncan Todd's got another question. If y'all could invent a new G.I. Joe or Cobra character, what would it be? We're getting to that. But
we'll get to that towards the end.
Real quick.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages. Now back to G.I. Joe.
All right. And so
Let's
talk about original characters. Because we had fun with this. On the Discord, on the Elfbait Discord, I had posted a thread, pitch your original character, and a few folks got in, but maybe we'll get some more going there after this one, and we'll really see it to fire it up. Because, as I mentioned, I've made a bunch of characters back in the past. The ones I pitched were off the top of my head and were fun. Chris actually has gone super fan on us and made new cards. So
I found a site that did it, so there wasn't all me.
And then Jason, I know you've probably made some in your past because you've played the game, and you're also just you're an original character kind of guy. You cosplay your own characters in the past with your own your own Mandalorian costume. You didn't make a Boba Fett costume. You made your own character, and so let me see if I can find these. Because I had a couple of characters lined up, some of the cards that we'd made. I didn't make cards for mine, so while I'm looking for these, I'm going to go ahead and talk about just the two characters that I came up with in the thread off the top of my head. Actually, that's a good point. Let me share the Discord link. But I had created, first of all, a new Cobra troop type called a vampire bat, because if you're familiar with G.I. Joe, it in Cobra, the bats were the robotic troops for Cobra. It was a
Battle Android Trooper.
Really fun figures, to be honest. I mean, the interchangeable parts, and didn't they have a backpack that held their extra parts or something like that? I can't remember.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just a really great add-on. And so my vampire bats were the advanced version of those. Basically, Dr. Mindbender using some form of like algorithmic, cybernetic recording of what think about like Taskmaster from Marvel, how he can like watch somebody and study their moves and learn how to do it. Kind of was drawn off of that. Like Dr. Mindbender had basically run this AI computer algorithm that was studying the fighting styles of characters like Storm Shadow and Jinx and Snake Eyes, and they created their own robot ninjas, which are the vampire bats, kind of night operative assassins with built-in weapons and customizable systems like the other bats. That was the first one I made, and then the other one was a character called Whiplash, which, interestingly enough, both of these, somebody else has also come up with characters for them, but they're very different because, of course, they're pretty obvious. Like why there was never a vampire bat, like completely, flummoxes me because it seems like an obvious one. But my character Whiplash was sort of in the same line as Crocmaster, except for her thing with snakes. And so I envisioned her even along the lines of like just how the action figure it would, she would have like the monochrome, metallic rubber snake whip with like a rubber snake that would hang around her neck and sculpted on snakes around her wrists. And the whole thing was she was a snake person. Like she wasn't a snake person, but she was, she was a snake trainer, whereas Crocmaster was like the reptile master in general. And her thing was like she had the specially made cybernetic snake, and she actually was a master of poisons and stuff like that. But that was my two that I came up with off the cuff at the top of the thread. So, I mean, just as a demonstration, that's pretty easy. G.I. Joe just is a fertile bed for coming up with cool stuff.
It's easy to do.
Yeah. So Now,
Hey, I'll be right back. My daughter needs me for just a
that's cool.
moment.
We'll go with Chris.
Well, I
What?
created Hellbent, a Dreadnought.
Yeah, I'm trying to find your character card for him. Yeah, in just a second.
Yeah, my Dreadnought was a disillusioned Army veteran who came home and everything was just not the way it was. And that happened to a lot of vets. And he became a motorcycle enthusiast and went down to Daytona and ran into Torch in a bar. And they got in a barroom brawl together, and he joined the Dreadnoughts.
Yeah, and the thing is, I think that's indicative right there of like how much or how little you want to put into your character. And this is going to be super small because the file size was horrible. But yeah, so here's his character of Hellbent.
Yeah, the Joe Customs file creator. You have to get the specific size on the image you use, and then editing to make all the letters go on the page correctly. That was a lot of fun and a lot of work, but it turned out pretty good, I think.
Yeah, it's fun to have, even if you can't do much with it. I know you had also posted another character that you had done, which was
yeah, I posted quite a bunch of those. I took those green shirts and turned them all into individual characters, and they came with a 4-pack in the early, right when the 25th anniversary started. It was like the second or third year in. They brought out a 4-pack of green shirts, and I turned those into characters. And yeah, the action pilot from that actually came out in the late '90s as a keychain figure. It was kind of cool. Yeah, I gave him a name and a file card.
Yeah, you also showed this one, Boomer, which was your write-up of
Boomer,
one of the official figures that they didn't evidently make.
Well, they like I said, in the late '90s, they came out with these. They based them off the old '60s GI Joes, where they had the action Marine, action soldier, action sailor, and action pilot. I think they even had an action astronaut too, but I don't remember for sure on that one. But this is the only one I picked up because I had just picked up another jet from some other line, and I needed a pilot for it. I was like, oh, there's a GI Joe keychain right here, and it was weird that they put those out because they weren't part of the regular line.
Yeah, but it's and then of course there's always those dollar store Joe knockoffs that you can tap into as well, because they're built after the same tooling.
Dollar Tree did Final Faction, which they were like kind of Star Wars in articulation, but they were still decent figures for $1. And
they're big. They're not 3.5.
They're about the same size. They work.
But there are and have been eternally GI Joe knockoffs that are essentially the same tooling.
The core,
and there's, and of course then you get into the overseas stuff like Action Force and stuff like that, where the real American wasn't exactly a selling point. So I almost played the Canadian intro for the GI Joe because we have a lot of Canadian channel friends, but they have a different intro for it.
We found one Joe, Canadian Joe.
Oh yeah, who was the Canadian Joe?
Backstop. He came with that tank, the Persuader, in 1987.
Oh yeah, cool.
So
let's see. So Jason, what characters have you made? Even if you don't have any visual aids.
I've made so many over the years, it's ridiculous.
Favorites then?
Favorite Joes that are mainline Joes would obviously Clutch, because he was the first Joe I actually got. Gung Ho, because I'm a Marine, former Marine. And I would have to say Duke, because I really identified with Duke, especially during my military career. Yeah. He was the Joe's Joe. Like, hey, I'm your friend, but you need to stay in line. You need to get this done. And of course, Sergeant Slaughter, because I mean, come on, it's Sergeant Slaughter, man.
Yeah, those are your favorite ones. But like, what have you created or any originals?
I did have Mechhead. and I tried to make a file card for him. He's basically an MP who likes to work on hot rods. So he was kind of more like a vehicle specialist. Eventually, I'll make the figure for him. There's a miniatures company I'm going to make the figure from that we spoke about earlier.
Oh yeah, yeah. If folks are interested, there are companies out there doing STLs. If you have 3D printing, even if you don't, there's actually a couple of there's several companies that are doing very obvious, not GI Joe type stuff, but the STL community is got a lot of folks who have done modular kits for Joe stuff. But then again, and Jason mentioned this when we were talking leading up to the stream, is the wide variety of stuff that appeared in GI Joe allows you to use pretty much any miniature within reason for a GI Joe character.
And that'll really depend on what era of GI Joe you want to play too. If you want the 80s gritty, of course you're going to go with like the Vietnam looking soldiers. But if you go with today, sci-fi is the limit. I mean,
oh yeah, and there was also that weird like transition from the 80s to the 90s where we started to see some of that stuff start to bleed in. But it all comes down to what you're trying to do for your stuff. And snake monsters are a favorite of miniature producers, so your Cobra insanity is well taken care of.
There was a board game called Heroescape that put out a ton of different miniatures, and they covered a wide variety of eras. They had people with guns, they had people with swords, you name it. Heroescape put it out, and it was only out for like maybe 2 years, and then it just died. I don't know why, because they had these interlocking hex tiles, and you could build your own dungeons and everything just to play the board game. It was kind of cool. You could actually use them for miniatures. So
that game is interesting because while it did die officially, there's such a huge fan following of it that now with the 3D printing, people are doing new tiles and stuff for it, and there's actually a pretty vibrant community of super fans. Sort of like the GW one. I think GW Hero Quest. I
can't remember what. I know what you're talking about. The Hero something.
Yeah, I think it's Hero Quest. The Milton Bradley GW crossover that they did, because later on they did Warhammer Quest, which was the advanced version of that. But yeah, that one's even had Kickstarters to produce new stuff, but that's not really GI Joe. But I mean, with GI Joe and the 3D environment, because the thing is, there's a lot of people doing modern sci-fi vehicles too, especially in like a lot of the Shadowrun Cyberpunk type STL communities, and then also the GW knockoff, not GW groups are doing it, but also in a lot of the post-apocalyptic stuff that's being done. I mean, there's a good grounds to hunt for potential dreadnoughts and stuff like that.
Oh, absolutely.
Because
I'm just really surprised there's not a lot more out there in the 3D STL community for GI Joe.
Probably because of Hasbro. I would imagine that a lot of people are just afraid of, because unlike Lucasfilm, who seems to be, or the Star Wars thing, who seems to not care, about who's producing Star Wars STL stuff out there.
Well, with Lucasfilm, it's more of a understanding. Like, if we produce this figure in this pose, don't make an STL for it. Okay, cool. Let's make an alternate pose.
Yeah, but Hasbro, on the other hand, is quite litigious, and I mean, we all know Disney is pretty litigious too. But there's that it's a long-standing agreement with Star Wars, at least. But I feel like a lot of it is probably because people are just afraid of having Hasbro drop an Optimus Prime on their house, and
and that's what gets me, because you have Transformers Con, TF Con.
Yeah.
Where, it's I believe it's still officially licensed by Hasbro, and they allow vendors to sell third-party Transformers. And so it's like, okay, why can we sell the third-party Transformers, the not Optimus Prime, the Optimus Max is one of them I can think of off the top of my head. Why isn't this happening with G.I. Joes? Is the franchise dead? Or has there been a loss of interest in it?
Yeah, it's hard to tell with a company like Hasbro. I mean, not that I'm here to Hasbro bash. I mean, there's plenty to bash about them, but the one nightmare in this kind of echoes in the D&D community is once Hasbro has something, they'd never let it go. They would rather lock it in a vault and hold on to it for a revival later on down the road than let anybody else play with that. And right now, I think that's the fear with D&D is if D&D keeps tanking, they're just going to shelve it. I mean, other people will be able to work with it, and they always will. But as far as the brand that's out there, it'll go away. And G.I. Joe may be the same way. For all we know, that the role-playing game was perhaps a way for them to try and generate interest, test the waters, milk a little bit of money out of that IP that's not really doing anything right now.
Well, right now, the classified series is doing really well for Hasbro. They are selling like crazy.
Is that more of a collector's market action figure?
Yeah, it's these 6-inch figures that I've been showing off here.
Yeah,
they're gorgeous if you can find them on shelves.
They are. Yeah, they're hard to find.
But again, those are also more of along the lines of stuff for adults to buy for their nostalgia rather than a kid. What surprises me and what I would like to see, I mean, we're kind of getting off the topic of gaming G.I. Joe, but we'll get back there. We're in the second hour. There's a little bit of ramble. Video games. G.I. Joe seems like fertile ground for video games. Can you imagine a Snake Eyes game where your whole duty was going in there like Tenchu style doing stealth killer missions as Snake Eyes? Where it was all about sneaking around or a G.I. Joe RTS. I know RTSs are kind of dead, but yeah, come on. You could probably make an RTS come back to life with G.I. Joe.
Yeah, the two video games for G.I. Joe that came out were just abysmal. They were just horrible.
Well, such as a curse of licensed tie-in video games. They're usually shitty platformers or reskins of other games.
Rise of Cobra wasn't bad, but you had to really get into it before it started being fun to play. That was the problem with it.
That's a good one. Do a City of Heroes or something style MMO for G.I. Joe. You've got little missions and instances all over the world that you can do instead of that would be fun. I mean, I can see that working. Make your own Joe, and they could monetize the shit out of it too, because that's a big issue for everybody. Like, okay, cool. You want the special 1990s Snake Eyes skin? Okay, cool.
And they could even offer, you made your custom G.I. Joe. Here's an STL for $7.99. Go ahead, print out your custom Joe.
I don't pay much attention to phone games, so I missed this one. G.I. Joe RTS phone game.
Yeah, it was crap. So I had it installed for about 2 hours, and that was it.
And I mean, this is a good thing. This is not a good thing, but a good comment, Mara Hockman. You are right. And wrong. Locking it in the vault and not letting anybody else play with it allows you to maximally capitalize on it when you release it from the vault with your next big push. And as far as it's only valuable if people want to buy the merch, that's the nature of the company and that's the nature of the business. That's their responsibility, is to make you want to buy it. And locking stuff in the vault is one way to make you want to buy it.
I think Hasbro could make a lot more money if they went back to that 80s format where they had small things that people could buy and the big things.
The problem with that is that kids don't play that way anymore.
This is true.
Now, it's all video games now. Like, my kids grew out of action figures at about age 5.
Yeah.
Whereas I was still playing with action figures, and I'm not afraid to admit it, until I was about 16, 17 years old.
I was a bit older, so don't feel bad.
Yeah, I mean, I still play with them, but I mean, actually play with them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the play modes of kids have buried the action figure as a viable product line in and of itself.
They're more collectibles.
now it's
Yeah,
all
that's why it's all
collectible.
shifted to like Black Series, Star Wars, and all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Because that's where people are gonna, and who knows if that's gonna last. I mean, after The Last of Us are dead, is there going to be enough people with enough nostalgia for it to really even make it marketable? But at that time, though, will whatever the next generation is get like a huge boom? Like, here's this thing called GI Joe, and we've completely reinvented it for your day and age.
I mean, that's what happened with us because my dad had, the 12-inch original Joes, and then when the 3 1/4
Oh
inch
yeah,
line
they were
came out,
gone
he was
for a
like,
long time.
"Oh, I used to have a GI Joe. I traded it for a bicycle." I was like, "What?"
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I had any of the full size GI Joes growing up is because my parents were flea market folks, and like I'd walk around, they'd give me money and let me like wander around the flea market, and I would pick up anyone that was like I had the Jeep, the big Jeep with the 50 cal in the back, but mine was the one that was in the Air Force colors. It was the blue one. That was kind of cool. So I had like this weird, not the olive drab one, but the blue Air, which later
that was
on,
the Cobra one.
like the big one.
Yeah, if it was,
I didn't realize Cobra existed back then.
Oh no, you're talking about the 12-inch one.
The
Okay,
12-inch figures. Yeah, I had a blue
My bad.
Willys Jeep, Jeep with the 50 on it, and from what I understood, it didn't have any stickers on it. From what I understood, that was the Air Force version that went with the Air Force GI Joe. Let's see. And this is true. They love action figures, but the point I was trying to make is it's not about the love of action figures. It's how you buy, collect, and play with them. Most 51-year-old action figure folks are buying them and then standing them on a shelf or taking them to the office with them and looking at them for nostalgia and appreciation. They're not out in a sand pit digging holes and making up the newest Cobra base.
I took one of mine outside to take some pictures. That's it. I try not to take them outside at all. It's kind of crazy because as a kid I played with them everywhere.
That's why I can't wait to have grandkids so I could get back to playing with my toys again.
Well, and the thing is built in. It's not that there aren't kids that play that way. It's just it's not the standard. It's not enough of them for a company like Hasbro to even consider going back to that 3-inch figure stage and do a push.
It's not really cost effective for parents anymore because what GI Joes when we were kids were like $1.82 or something like that.
You could buy them with your pocket money.
Yeah, and now it's like $14.99 for one figure. It's like, dude, no.
Yeah, and all you had to do was convince your mom to take you to Toys R Us,
or have it fall off the back of the truck,
or find go to a KB in the mall. KB was great because if they weren't on the pegs at Toys R Us anymore, then you go to KB and they might have them because that was where all the leftovers went. But yeah, I mean, you could that was the genius we were talking about this earlier of Hasbro's marketing strategy in the 80s is that no matter how much money you had in your pocket, you could buy something worthwhile for your GI Joe collection. So maybe you didn't get as much allowance that week, or maybe all your money came from doing lawns or whatever, and it's the fall. Yeah, nobody's got a lawn to mow, right? And so you're like, all I got is $1.50. I'm still going to buy a GI Joe, or I'm going to save up a couple of weeks, and also at that low a cost, you could talk your parents easily enough into saying it's only a couple of bucks. Like my mom had no problem. Like here's $5 when we would go to the store, go to the grocery store. Here's $5. Go pick something out. And once I realized that there was other stuff to buy besides fruit pies and candy, you guarantee. I mean, it started with Star Wars cards. I mean, funny anecdote. I got in trouble for buying Star Wars cards instead of candy in the 70s, the late 70s after the first movie came out. Walked down to the store with my allowance, and my stepdad at the time, who seemed to always be there anytime I was getting in trouble. I think he had a spidey sense. I don't know how this constituted trouble, but I got in trouble for lying to him because I didn't buy with my money what I said I was going to buy. But I'm like, but I bought collectible cards, not candy, and you're always getting on me about eating too much candy. But the point is that it was really easy for kids to talk their parents into spending $5 on them, and you could still get $5 to get you 2 Joes.
Or
You
the
know,
You could have
Vamp
argued that the
motorcycle
cards
too.
were still candy.
oh yeah, the Ram
Back
motorcycle, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean those smaller kits, the smaller play sets. And $5, every couple of weeks would get you those, and then your birthday would get you some of the larger ticket things. And if you're that one kid in all of existence, you got the flag. Because there's only
Wasn't me. I did get the Crusader space shuttle, but I never got the flag.
Yeah, I managed that when I was working at the time.
my buddy managed to get the shuttle and the Terror Drome.
Yeah, I missed that one too.
The Terror Drome was such a cool playset.
I still don't
my
have
god,
one of
there's
those.
so much stuff in the Terror Drome.
Those are hard to put together nowadays. To get one complete, they're very expensive. Especially the flag. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I tried to commission somebody to 3D print me a flag. And he was like, "Oh, it'd be like $400." No, that's okay.
Still cheaper than trying to buy one on the secondary market.
True.
Yeah.
But at that point, you might as well just pull out your foam core and start going to town on your own, right?
I can't imagine them putting together a flag for the 6-inch figures. That'd be crazy. It was 7 feet long for the 3 3/4 inch.
Well, what you do there is you just go to Craigslist, buy yourself a small secondary market recreational watercraft, and then just build with your carpenters. You go hire Cody, and he'll come over and build the superstructure for you to make it look like the flag. Basically, and then you just sit in the conning tower and motor yourself around the water.
That'd be pretty crazy.
I'm sure somebody's done it, to be honest. I would not be surprised if somebody who never got the flag as a kid but has the money now has built their own flag. And I would almost bet money that somebody has built a personal watercraft that looks like the flag, because we're in that age where everybody's like, making Snoopy flying on his doghouse, drones and X-Wing drones stuff. Why not?
Yeah, Sergeant Mushroom's talking about the battle platform. I picked that up a couple of years ago. Finally, I wish I bought it back in the day, because I'd seen it in the stores and went, as a kid, I was like, "What is this? This is just a little square. I don't want this." But as an adult, I'm looking at it now, going, "Man, this is cool."
Yeah, it was like kind of a necessary item, because I was in Fort Lauderdale at the time, so you needed that and the whale and the devilfish.
Never got
the shark,
all the water toys,
all the water toys, just to go into the pool at the apartment complex. Let's play G.I. Joe, and insane playtime. It was so
Sergeant
great.
Mushroom is one of the guys I used to play G.I. Joe with back in high school. He's from my high school crew. When I moved out to the country, he was like the only new friend really that I made when I got moved out of the suburbs to the country. He lived down the street. He was a gamer. It was meant to be. He's a cool guy. Had I been thinking, I probably would have had him on the stream. And I'm sorry, Jim, that I didn't invite you. But
maybe
this kind of happened organically. What?
So maybe we can do a part 2 later.
Or maybe we'll end up streaming a G.I. Joe RPG at some point, and I'll just drag his ass
that
in
would be
here.
cool.
Hey, I'm down for that. Definitely.
I know that Gaming with ADHD was talking about running one. So,
well, and Sergeant Mushroom, Jim, whichever you want to know. I mean, I don't feel like I'm giving too much away by calling him Jim. There's only like 4 billion of them on the planet, I'm sure. But is also a big TMNT and Other Strangeness guy. He does not have a YouTube channel, but he does have a Facebook group dedicated to homebrewed TMNT stuff. So if that is a thing you're into, that group could use some new members and some input. But he and I used to just homebrew the shit out of stuff for that.
Send me the link. I'm down for TMNT.
All right, I will do. I'll do that after the stream. And I'll probably just put it in the show notes too, when I put it all together, because yeah, why not? Let's see. That is correct. You did make a character card, and I'm going to bring that up. Mar Hockman made up his own original character, and I do apologize. I totally spaced that. Your character was pretty cool. We talked about it
Yeah, I like
on
it.
the stream. I'm just trying to figure out if I can find it. Here it is. I have to explode it up because, of course, they came out super tiny. And just a moment here. All right, so here we go. This is Mar Hockman's character, Airwave, Advanced Air Combat. Kind of a cool, I would almost call it like late stage G.I. Joe concept with that high tech sci-fi angle. She was a pilot who also then had like a microwave maser weapon. That was cool. I thought it was a cool concept. It really fit into that late stage GI Joe angle where they were getting a little more high tech in sci-fi.
It's interesting how both he and I, or who made characters on file cards, chose sub teams to make characters from. I chose a Dreadnought, and he chose Sky Patrol. I do like his little reference to my character and his quote at the bottom. It was kind of cool.
And see, there you go. We're already gaming.
Yep, there you go.
But that's the thing about, going back to the sub factions, and we kind of touched on it is when we were talking about, how to game. You can make up whatever angle you want. The 80s G.I. Joe was all about bringing in like new sub factions, new specialty teams. And in the course of play, I mean, G.I. Joes could become Cobras and Cobras could become G.I. Joes because, there are traders and there are people who had their minds changed. Like Cobra might, like a Cobra agent might be an agent for the wrong reason. And, through constant interaction with that NPC, suddenly he becomes, a Joe, or maybe your character used to be a Cobra, and
Mercer's a good character like that.
Yeah,
Mercer, yeah.
In the 2000s, they had
he was the former Viper, wasn't he?
Yeah, former Viper who joined Slaughter's Marauders.
Yeah, like I said, in the 2000s, they had a guy named Blackout who was Joe recruit. His brother and sister got into the Joes, and he didn't, and that made him so jealous and mad. He went and joined Cobra and became their sniper. But he was a cool character. He was called Blackout.
And that also lends to in role playing connections between the characters. Like, for instance, a good one was from the 80s cartoon. You find out that Lady J is somehow related to Destro.
Yep.
She doesn't know it, and he knows it, but he only knows it because the Baroness found out.
And it's that kind of crazy stuff that you can just write in. It doesn't have to even be made as part of your character. The GM almost has like this ultimate, fiat to like just write in weird connections. The Baroness is your third cousin twice removed. Beltane, to answer your question here, though, that is to be determined. It would probably come down to some consensus of what the players wanted to do if I was running it, or and what we wanted to run and what we all had access to, because I don't think any of us actually want to use the official game. So,
no.
And I know that Gaming with ADHD, that was he was wanting to run the actual IP game, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
That. Yeah,
I believe so. If I were to do it now, I'd probably use riffs and just reskin it because of that wide variety of character classes you have to choose from.
Oh, cool! That's awesome. Jim, you got to meet Larry Hama.
Still haven't had that opportunity yet.
And then he had this to say about the new game as well. So
that's exactly what I told Chris. It was just overly complicated to make your character.
For no reason.
They don't do a really good job. Like in most RPGs, they tell you, okay, this is going to work with this, and then this will work with this will work with this. It's the formula that I hate of, you get your essence points from this, and then like another chapter later, okay, now you're going to add more essence points. It's like, okay, that totally changes my character. So you have to do a lot of reading before you actually sit down and make your character, which is frustrating for a lot of people. it's definitely, the new game is definitely not for new RPG players. You got to have some experience or have somebody who is experienced with you to generate your character. Playing is fine, but the character generation is just a sloppy mess.
I'm gonna
It's almost like you need a Joe to translate the rules
Yeah.
to you.
I'm gonna bring this up because I mentioned it before. Here's the Cartoon Action Hour Season 3 Dark Brigade Deluxe Series book. Eddie Webb is a designer that I know somewhat. I used to interact with him online a lot. He wrote a lot of Vampire the Masquerade type stuff as well, but and so he wrote this book, and it's gonna be all wonky, but just flipping through it, you can see this is their G.I. Joe versus like evil monsters of the night, and it's wild. But they even went so far as to do like data cards for the characters, and so they had the write-ups for all of the characters. You have your own custom vehicles done G.I. Joe style, where they're slightly based on realistic vehicles, but then made a little wonky.
I'll have to check this out.
Cartoon Action Hour is the game, and it's pretty solid because it's, like I said, it was designed to do Saturday morning and after school cartoons.
Well, it looks like we could just use this.
Hey,
yeah,
I'm down for it.
My only problem is I've never actually played it, so I it would be kind of a clunky thing. And the cool thing is at one point here's the evil base, and then you got like the pack in the corner here, and here's like a blow up picture of like a kind of a group photo of the evil organization. Interestingly enough, they have this whole kind of nod to Hellraiser up here as well.
Nice.
Up here it's like, and they have zombie minions. But again, this is that sort of thing that you could play. If you look, they've got a whole season, episode seeds, episode 101, 102, 103, and that's how you build campaigns in the game is as a cartoon series, and then they short form. Here's their their table of contents. But yeah, it's like, and then they even break down like the goons and stuff here, and what are the non-goon troopers and the goon type enemies, and that's kind of how they distinguish it in the game. So there is a game out there, that is not the official IP that gets it. It's not, and they don't bother to dive into the hardcore nitty gritty of the militarism or anything like that, which I really don't think that that's necessary. Going back to Marvel superheroes, the talents system in Marvel superheroes is all you would really need to reflect the skill sets as really referenced in the real American hero era of G.I. Joe. They had some specialties. Those specialties are going to have skills associated with them. And so if you're making a character using the Marvel system, you would just give them the appropriate talents. Like, okay, hand to hand, cybernetics, computer programming, whatever the case would be.
The file cards really have everything you need if somebody really wanted to create a game. It's all right there.
Well, I mean, background-wise, yeah. The only thing it doesn't really have is the mechanics.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. To make the mechanics, you have the specialties all listed right there of what they used in G.I. Joe. I don't know why they made it like Jason said so ridiculously complicated. It didn't need to be. It was pretty simple, straightforward, and they just made it complicated.
If I did Palladium G.I. Joe, I would play that. If you did Palladium G.I. Joe, if I can read, Palladium G.I. Joe.
It works. To me,
it works. I would just have to. The only problem is I don't have access to a ton of Palladium stuff anymore because I lost that a long time ago when I moved out of the roommate house and in with my wife. A lot of my gaming stuff stayed behind, and I was never able to collect it. And so that was unfortunate. So I lost a lot. I do have some stuff still. But
I mean, you could use Heroes Unlimited to make your Joe also.
Yeah.
Just like Marvel, very easy.
Honestly, Heroes Unlimited or Ninjas and Super Spies, I think would have all you need, because pretty much every joke could easily be condensed into a super spy.
Yeah.
Of some sort. Or, Heroes Unlimited has the high tech or kind of the skill monkey character, for playing like your Punishers or your Agents of Shield and stuff like that. Your gun toting vigilantes. So you could definitely do that. Let's see. Cody, the only problem with Recon is
You got to use Recon Second Edition, not the First Edition.
yeah, is that Recon does one thing very well, and that's Vietnam.
Yeah, it'd definitely be more for the early '80s GI Joe than it would be to bring it into a modern setting.
Yeah,
which I think you kind of have to do now, with the way technology has advanced and so forth for your game. Unless you want to do the old Vietnam setting.
I'm not real familiar with that or Ninjas or Super Spies, but
Ninjas and Super Spies is
basically
game,
what it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. And then it had the Mystic China supplement for it.
Mm-hmm.
But Ninjas and Super Spies was basically a love letter to the 1980s Kung Fu magazine.
Hong Kong action theaters.
Yeah, because it had every martial art and its grandma written up in Palladium stats. But then it also had Super Spy stuff. So, like, if you wanted to have a character who used that really obscure martial art that's only practiced in one tiny little country somewhere, it was probably in there. They even had like the Soviet, hodgepodge martial arts sambo.
Yeah,
it is. They had that in there. So they really did their research. It's almost like Jim Sergeant Mushroom actually wrote that book, because he was that guy. He knew all of the martial arts growing up. I remember him.
Yeah, we used to call it the Snake Eyes Handbook.
Oh yeah, and you're not wrong.
Literally,
it also single-handedly broke most Palladium games. If you used a Ninjas and Super Spies character with any of the other games, they were so overpowered. I know, like, a lot of us started using Ninjas and Super Spies martial arts in our TMNT games. I think and it suddenly you were just way too badass, because it expects that everybody else is going to be a Ninjas and Super Spies badass.
Oh yeah, you'd have characters like your character would have like 6 attacks in one melee versus everybody else's 2 attacks. So he's like, I'm gonna do this, and then I'm gonna chop him like that and kick him like that. It definitely broke it, but it was a fun experience.
Well, and a lot of the way that Palladium works with your skills often enhancing your abilities. The more you piled up, your character would start out with pretty modest, mediocre physical stats, and by the time you had physical training, acrobatics, all this stuff, you're like, athletics, your stats were all just running. And that was cool, because like running, so many other games you get a skill and it just gives you the skill. Palladium really looked at it from a holistic point of view. If you take running as a skill, it's also going to increase your endurance. Your
speed stat.
Well, it also didn't give you like a +1 to your I can't remember my Palladium stats, to your physical endurance or something like that.
So basically, if you wanted to make the ultimate super spy or ninja or whatever, you would take the acrobatics skill, the running skill, bodybuilding, boxing, and then your combat form, and you could easily at level 1 have 5 attacks. Versus if somebody else just wanted to be the tech head or the gearhead, they'd have 1 or 2 attacks just for being alive, basically. But it also increased your melee, your parry, your dodge. Sometimes increase another skill on top of that. So yeah.
Yeah. Original Traveler would be an interesting one, because it does have that career-based character generation, which would really dovetail well into how G.I. Joe characters in the real American hero era were built, where they had their backgrounds that led them to being a Joe. You could probably go through that life path and just rewrite it real easy. And this is fun. Yes, Jim. And to answer an earlier comment, yes, I also have resources. I have online resources for Palladium stuff, uh, procured through various means.
Mm-hmm. We'll
um,
not speak of those means, sir.
no, but for reference purposes only. But yeah, I can't even tell you where I got them, to be honest, because I haven't had a computer for a long time. Things have appeared. um, and but yeah, I'm very out of tune with Palladium, so I would have to like gear up. But that's going to be the case with anything. I would be really tempted to try and run it using Cartoon Action Hour because I've wanted to try the system. So it'd be a chance to play with the system and then learn it if I got to relearn a game anyways. But honestly, like the D6 Star Wars system, that old D6, there's D6 Modern, the generic D6 system. You could easily use GI Joe with that, and that's a character building system that is super easy because it's just a matter of putting out your D and then picking your skills. And the D6 Modern is, I think, free or low cost on Drive-Thru RPG because the D6 team has been making stuff. The old West End team just continued making the D6 system even after they lost the Star Wars license.
I think you could still get it directly from West End Games for free, just the base core D6. But maybe even
I don't
D20
like
Modern.
Mini 6, Bear. I've tried Mini 6. I actually tried Mini 6 when I ran my D6 Pulp game and decided then to run D6 Modern because Mini 6 was too pared down for my taste.
So what would you think about using D20 Modern?
D20 Modern?
The Wizards of the Coast, 3.5 version. Because they did have the modern system. I never explored it for G.I. Joe, but it seems to me that'd be a great entryway to get people into the game since they're so familiar with the D20 system.
If you were trying to bring new people in today's environment, D20 Modern might be a good way to go. My only hesitation is that D20 Modern is based on the 3.5, the 3.0 engine,
Right.
which is overly clunky and crunchy. And running that game, there's a reason why while I did play 3.5, I didn't play it much. And actually, it was during 3.5 that I started dipping back into OSR stuff. Because 3.5, trying to run it, writing an adventure, because I'm a homebrew guy too, so I wasn't doing published adventures. I was spending way too much time flipping through books and bookkeeping, and because you can't just fudge it in 3.5 like you can in other D&Ds. Even in 5th edition, I can fudge it really easy and still have it work. 3.5 was so specific. So yeah, I mean, while there is a good range of products for it, D20 Modern, I would hesitate. If somebody knows the system and is comfortable with it, by all means, it's a good way to go because it is specifically written for that kind of a setting.
Didn't much care for it. It's what led me to make my own game. It wasn't a bad game.
Bear,
you for me.
Hyperbolic, pedantic, grumpy old northerner. Yes, D6 Modern is not an actual thing. D6 Adventure is the thing, but it is D6 for the modern era ostensibly. So, let's see. But yeah, I think D6 might be the way to go because it's easy to teach. It's a simple system. It's just, just rolling D6s. And you can pick up the book for free. And it's a character build system that while it's not going to get into the nuts and bolts of, I was an infantryman, you can just give yourself the skills that you would expect your Joe to have based on the background that you set. And the modern version of it, because they kept developing D6 after Star Wars stopped, they do have aspects of like perks and disadvantages to buy for characters that can give you like weird, I have a trauma from back when, or I have a perk of a cybernetic arm or whatever, depending on the character you're making, you can build that into there as well. And it also has a mysticism system in there because D6 Adventure is designed to play for all those things like paranormal investigation or pulp adventure. So I think it has a couple of magic systems in it. So you could even have those weird esoteric cobras with their mind controlling powers and stuff like that, and not have it be overly tricky.
You just mentioned traumas. That's another thing that the new game has, which kind of sucks. It forces you. If you take like 3 perks, 3 good things for your character, you automatically had to take the trauma for it, like a hang up.
Oh yeah. So you have to have a trauma for your character.
Yeah, well, not necessarily trauma, like a hang up. Like
Yeah.
I remember one specifically was you become like so enamored with social media. So if there's a large gathering of people, you want to make sure you look your best, and everybody takes a shot of you at your best angle. I was like, this okay, whatever.
I know I can see what they're going for. They're
Right,
trying to build in role play aspects to the character, kind of like 5th edition did, where you had like your various, my bond is this and my flaw is
Right.
this. That's way specific. I mean, is that just an example they have, or is it actually a specific one they call out?
No, they have. Everyone has a specific one under your skill flow chart. So you can make up your own, but it's the way they frame it is that you have to take it. Unlike for 5e, you can kind of skip the flaw, but the flaws come naturally, like you make it with your character. This specifically says no, you have to take some type of flaw for your character.
Yeah, I mean, in D6 Adventure, if you were building Snake Eyes, for example, I believe there is like a disfigured, flaw in there that you could take, to.
It's not even that. This is like social flaws.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that exists if you wanted something like that for your character. Because I know some of the Joes had that. Like Cover Girl was kind of vain,
Right.
because she'd been a model. And somebody pointed out, and I'm going to share this one. Where'd it go? Shipwreck's parrot was a hang-up, because I remember in the cartoons he was always going after his parrot.
Yeah.
But and you could build that into your characters though, and then like Mutt and his dog. Those social connections. Like Mutt would go back for his dog if he got cut off from his dog or something like that. So I get what they're going for, and that's not a bad thing to write into your character. But I feel like that comes naturally when writing characters also.
Mm-hmm.
But I also have to remember that role-playing games are not necessarily a role-playing game is written for a newcomer and not an experienced player.
Right.
Those sorts of things are the things that experienced players just build into their characters over time because they've already played the generic no flaws character that's boring as fuck. They've played that guy. I've played a fighter who swings his sword and kills things 42,000 times. I'm ready to play the fighter who's missing a hand, is one-eyed, and doesn't want to fight anymore. Kind of thing. Because eventually you just get tired of that stuff. But again, I always have to remind myself, role-playing games are written for newcomers. Not all of them. There are some that are written and forget that somebody new is going to come to that game. Let's see. Devil Girl from Mars. I think he's referencing the fact of his new video that he posted on Devil Girl from Mars. But yeah, there is definitely merit to a G.I. Joe role-playing game. We got about 15 minutes left in the stream, and I think we should really kind of start wrapping up with final thoughts. I think it's worth doing. I think it's worth pursuing once I have the time. Trying to maybe demonstrate it on stream and pick a day where we can play for several hours and sit tight and try and do a G.I. Joe playthrough. Chris, any final thoughts that you had?
I think we covered just about everything, but I just the idea of playing a GI Joe role playing game has always been in the back of my mind, and it just seems like I don't know, whatever I've tried to, like I even had a game system that I designed that had incorporated superpowers and soldiers together, and I tried to make a GI Joe game out of that, and the interest just wasn't there with my players. You definitely now with the internet and everything, the way we do things nowadays, it's a way different environment, and I think we could definitely find players who are interested.
Yeah. Jason?
I think the main thing is with the modern times of today, if you wanted to play a GI Joe game, it's really an open playing field. You can make it whatever you want. You can make it cartoony. You can make it very serious, and the system that you use would be what is best for you and your group.
Yeah.
Don't get hung up on one system. Be open to, like Eli has shown, Comic Book Action Hour. I've only heard of it recently. Sounds pretty good to me to play that game.
Yeah, and to kind of bullet point it, I mean, GI Joe is as a setting for a game is a game universe that has just this wide open sandbox for you to play in. Just about infinite character options, infinite story options, because you could do the covert stuff. Maybe your whole campaign is just the covert stuff and you're playing some Snake Eyesy type characters and that's all you want to play. Or maybe you want to do the big set piece action battles, or maybe you want to vary back and forth. It also would lend really well to troop play. Like everybody makes up a handful of Joes and you pick whichever one is good for the mission that you go on.
That leads into the sub factions.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, you could play a Cobra campaign where your whole deal is trying to thwart the Joes. I mean, they always talk about the evil campaign in D&D. I think it works a lot better in a GI Joe setting because you at least have some motivation. In that your Cobra motivations and Cobra characters are evil, yes, but you have I guess the other thing too is you have a lot of template exemplars for how to play it and how to tell stories in it. I mean, classic episode of GI Joe. This is the Viper. I'll be there on Tuesday.
Yeah,
such a great episode. Can you imagine not having known that episode and your GM pulls that on you at the table? And it's a goofy episode, but it's a great episode. And it just is an example of what you could play. And whether you want to, like you said, whether you want to lean into like the grittiness of the comic or the silly cartoon action hour of the show, or somewhere in between, or vary it back and forth. I mean, if you're doing troop style, maybe you've got some characters that you play in the grittiness and some characters you play in the goofiness. If you're playing a Dreadnought campaign, then all your characters are wild biker rowdy types, and you're just like playing with that kind of crazy off the hook. Everybody's a Logan Wolverine character, basically.
Yeah, and another thing to remember is the Joes originally it didn't start out with this massive plethora of characters. It was literally just 10 people. So you can easily do a campaign or even set your whole setting with just this is a specialized troop platoon of like 5 characters, which is your playing group. It wasn't until I believe 86 when they really started with the sub factions.
Yeah, I mean, you could even go to another country. You could decide to play the October Guard.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, October Guard.
What is Germany's version of GI Joe, right? You could just make that up. Like you could do anything. Or Bear, what's the Canadian GI Joe team?
It consists of backstop, and that's it.
Whatever it is,
literally the only
royal at the beginning,
fighting the evil forces of Sorry, but
I think a good mix of both the silly and the serious would work the best.
Oh yeah, and Mar Hockman add new guys every session. As a GM, you could introduce new NPCs all the time. Every time the Joes take on a different mission, they could run into some specialized NPC. Oh, you run into this guy and he's got like a Spider-Man T-shirt on, and he's he's just like wearing a pair of shorts, and he's your he's the GI Joe pop culture specialist.
You know what? That actually brought a good idea to my mind. You know how we stick to one character for the majority of a campaign. With GI Joe, one campaign can be your first character. Oh, I want to play something else. Boom, you make another new GI Joe.
Yeah,
or
and that's
Cobra Trooper.
that also feeds into that troop play thing that I was talking about. Like you have a stable of characters that you can just swap out with your mood and with the mission. That way you're not running into that GI Joe cartoon stupidity where like everybody's in a Sky Striker.
Yeah,
You wouldn't have to focus on character advancement because you'd have your characters and they'd be mission ready.
Well, and that's
exactly.
like the other thing. Like Marvel Superheroes, the game kind of understood that about the comic book characters, is those characters really don't gain in power routinely. It usually takes a special story element for them to ever actually change in skill.
Well, I'm not saying they couldn't learn new skills. I'm just saying they wouldn't have to.
Well, that's my point, is that you don't have to for it to still be fun. Comic book characters, Spider-Man's been doing the same damn thing for 50 years. And nobody's complaining. And occasionally characters will have profound power changes, and that happens as a story element, not as the accumulation of XP.
Well, you can also do that too much. I mean, that happened with Superman when they did the red and blue and they tried all these weird things with him, and it was just, you didn't need to do that. He was Superman.
Well, and that just comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of how to write Superman. But that's another thing. That's a topic best covered by Bear, because he's the comic guy. There you go. I would like to play an uptight German GSG-9 trooper. So there we go, Jim. You come up with the German version of GI Joe, and we'll make the German GI Joe team. Or would it just be a NATO team? So like every nation has its own submitted character into this whole sort of like a Interpol-esque European, real European hero, a real Euro hero.
I think that's what they were trying to lean towards in the live action movies, making it more of an international team. And
Probably.
It was just poor writing. I mean,
well, it's also marketing. Again, real American hero isn't much of a pitch outside this country.
Right.
You got to play to your audience too. So in the same token, you play your players.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And yes, you Bear. All right, so we are in the last 7 minutes. I think we've covered it all. We've had some fun on the stream with the bumpers and the intro music.
I think the only thing we really didn't cover were like miniatures, but that's we
talked about that there's some STL companies out there doing it, and I mean,
there's not much there. I mean, right now there's not much to really talk about other than, like you said, you can go to various places and do a troop builder where you build it to make your own custom Joe, but it's not going to end up being exactly what you want in most cases.
I mean, and honestly, if you're doing GI Joe, I'm more of a theater of the mind guy anyways. I would rather just draw my character. Of course, I can draw, but what gaming group doesn't have at least one pencil whore who knows how to draw?
Mine. None of my players can draw for anything.
Well, I'm sorry. That was me in our group.
It's all Hero Forge now. If they can't do it on Hero Forge, you're not getting a picture of your character.
To be fair, though, I mean, Hero Forge is good for that. If you can't draw, you can at least come up with a reasonable approximation thereof. So, yeah, I mean, other than that, I think that if we're to bullet point it, if you want to play it, like Jason said, find a system that find one that works for you. Like Chris was saying, play to your group, play the style of play that people want to play. There is room for it all within GI Joe. Remember, Eco Warriors was a thing. I can't
Oh,
remember what they're actually called. You know,
Eco
if you want-
Warriors.
Eco
They were
Warriors.
called the
They
Eco
changed the name
Warriors.
Yeah,
like
With their
if you wanted to
fluorescent
take an
colors.
environmental bent for GI Joe, well, they've already done it. So fuck all. You can do it whatever you want. You know, we're gonna do the GI Joe Anti-Animal Cruelty Squad. And your whole campaign's gonna be about there saving the animals. Okay, cool. You know, the World Wildlife Federation of Justice wing.
Mhm.
Although World Wildlife Federation of Justice is just Torrin Atkinson's animal superhero team, not to be confused with the World Wildlife Federation. So, but yeah, I mean, again, you could spin it however you want. I mean, there's a good Joe specialty. Some guy who was like from Africa, who was one of the wildlife guards who's out there protecting elephants and stuff. And he gets into Joe, because like he wants to because Cobra's out there abusing the gorillas. I mean,
I
we
could
will
even see
take them and we will turn them into super warriors. They're gonna cybernetically enhance gorillas and stuff.
I could even see Steve Irwin having become a Joe. Also,
We talked about that. We joked around about that. Like if they were still doing the 3-inch figures today, I guarantee you Steve Irwin would have a figure.
Absolutely.
Well, I always thought the Joe should incorporate more animals. I mean, why not a horse? Why not a chimpanzee or a gorilla?
G.I. Joe cavalry specialist.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most of the branches of service who have a history of having some sort of cavalry, which is basically the army, do have some guys who still practice those traditions.
And why do you have to stick
right
with
here on
water?
Fort Hill.
You could do it in the Old West and have a G.I. Joe-like team in the Old West.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
That's a totally different thing.
It sure is. But
You could do G.I. Joe in different time frames. The steampunk G.I. Joe. G.I. Joe, a real
that was
Wild West hero.
The
G.I.
Devil's
Joe
Due
is
G.I.
there.
Joe.
It's
The Devil's
G.I.
Due
Joe
G.I. Joe did
versus.
that.
I don't want to go there. Because it's like G.I. Joe versus. Or maybe it's G.I. Joe is Abraham Lincoln's new crack strike force to. I don't know. You could go a lot of weird places. G.I. Joe, a 14th century European hero, but but then again, time travel is a thing in G.I. Joe, so you could even oh crap, we're back here.
I'm stuck in a different era and have Cobra be there too. They all got stuck in a different time, and they just have to make do with what they've got. I mean, they did that in G.I. Joe and the Golden Fleece. They went back in time.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting, but also a little weird with the aliens. But you can do whatever. But not for G.I. Joe, not really.
It's like, all right, well, I know that like the Transformers ran into Atlantis, so why not the Joes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it.
Well, there was a book about G.I. Joe getting to Atlantis. This is one of those old Find Your Fate books.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. I mean, hell, we were talking about gorillas. I mean, you could make a case that you could make a character who was a G.I. Joe who was a uplifted gorilla and not have it be wrong. Who's your gorilla? Who's your G.I. Joe? I was a Cobra experiment. I was saved in a mission where they hit one of Dr. Mindbender's labs, and I am a gorilla with the brain of a human in him, and I miss my dog. And it's not going to feel out of place. Give him a T-shirt for a T-shirt jersey that he wears, and a pair of raggedy.
He wears Crocs.
Yeah, he wears Crocs. He's like the G.I. Joe equivalent of the Hulk. Yeah. And he would not feel out of place. Maybe he's Steve Irwin's partner. He's Steve Irwin's, like it's a playset. Yeah, Steve Irwin with, like Bobo.
Oh God,
Jane
Steve
Goodall
Irwin's
gets her
arch
official
enemy.
figure.
Steve Irwin's arch enemy is Croc Master.
No, it's the Tiger King. He would be a Dreadnought.
Yeah, Tiger King's definitely a Dreadnought.
There you go. But all right, so that brings us to the end. Thank you all for folks who join me. You guys want to pitch your channels or
Just G.I. Joe
not?
for Joe Takes on my From the Hill. That's been going on for my G.I. Joe Gold Bricks all month. And my cat has decided to invade your stream.
That's all right.
And Meghead Studios on YouTube and on Instagram. There is somebody, I got to point this out. There's somebody who's using my studio name, and I often get confused with him. It's not me. I've been established since 2011, 2012. So you'll know who I am. Trust me.
Yeah. To the folks in the channel or in the comments who have channels, there's Bear, Gen X GM. There is GM Cody, and Mar Hockman has been posting stuff. So that's kind of a new one. But we also had Mage's Musing pops in.
Yeah, I thought so.
And of course, his stuff is always super cool. Bear's channel is great for discussions and hot topic takes and just general world building stuff. GM Cody does a lot of good stuff on like D&D lore and history. So good stuff there. But yeah, thank you for everybody who came out. This was a fun stream. I think it's a worthwhile topic. If there's enough traction on it, and we'll see what some of the comments come in. But if folks want to talk about more, I find out other things that they really would like to see, go over to the Discord. I popped the link in the comments, so you can probably scroll back and find it. It'll be in the show notes. And maybe we can get something going again, talk about specific topics or do little shorts or maybe even get a game going. I'm going to call it here. Have a good one, folks. Go
Hey.
Joe.